everyone. We are back here at the Consortier Bethanien. Also say hello to the people that are following on streaming and the audience that we have here in Berlin. I'm very happy now to announce our keynote performance with Drew Pham. And the title of the keynote performance is Insurgent Hearts. I'm very glad to have Drew here with us. I think it's a very special moment also considering the work that the Disruption Network Lab normally does. Also in the previous conference that we organized, we had many US war veterans and also whistleblowers. So Drew is not a whistleblower, but I think that there are a lot of connections that we could draw with the previous conference that we organized here, in which we also spoke about the drone war and the Afghanistan's consequence on civilians. So I'm going to introduce more in-depth Drew Pham and also the moderator of the keynote, Jade Bernards. The idea is that now I introduce both of them, then I will leave the stage to Drew, and then they will come back later for a moment of question and answers, like a conversation with each other, and then with the public. Drew Pham is a queer transgender writer, educator, and child of war refugees of Vietnamese heritage. Her military service in Afghanistan with the US Army deeply radicalized her, and she returned home to pursue academic and creative work on legacies of violence. As a performer, she seeks to normalize transsexuality and desire in pornography. Currently, she serves as an adjunct lecturer in American Studies, writing and literature in New York City. She also works as editor for the Rats Bearing Tree, an online space established by combat veterans and dedicated to the publication by those who have experienced military, economic, and social violence. So after the performance of Drew Pham, Dahlia Damoiselle, we will have the question and answer with Jay Bernard. Jay is a writer from London. Their practice is interdisciplinary and rooted in social histories. Jay's poetry collection and performance Surge won the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year Awards 2020 and the Ted Hughes Award in 2017. They work as a programmer at the BFI Flair Film Festival and are currently a fellow at the AD program in Berlin. So now I leave the stage to Drew Pham. Thank you very much, Drew. The stage is yours.
Hi, everyone. Hello. I am a very awkward and nervous person, which is a very strange thing to be when you're a porn star. So I apologize. Also, this uniform, I haven't worn it in a very, very long time. So I'm a veteran of the American war in Afghanistan and the daughter of Vietnamese refugees, also a porn performer and an educator and writer. So what I'll be reading to you today is a collection of prose, poetry, and lyric essay. I have to say that, right, I am more than a little nervous for those of you coming to listen to a more kind of intellectual conversation about the intersection of state violence and trans identity, et cetera, I have really bad news. I may have catfished you, and for that, I'm sorry. I also want to apologize insofar as I'm going to tell you the same story about 4 different times, in different forms. And composing this has been a bit like translating myself into 5 languages, or dialects of the same language. Before I begin, I also have to give you a bit of a warning. The performance is violent because it has no choice but to hold a mirror to the violence that we all experience every day. Violence that I've experienced deeply as a transgender woman, as a person of color, as a queer person. And the world is full of killing and rape and racism and all of the phobias little boys in their father's clothes pass off as political positions. Prose, now here's the thing, but the beauty of writing, it kind of brings us a bit further. Poetry, on the other hand, breaks rules to make new meanings. Prose demands that her readers and audiences become collaborators in rendering an otherwise static language into life. Writing allows us to play, so what follows, though violent or difficult to hear or watch, is a form of reclamation play. Here I'll seek to break myself apart as the poet does to her lines, and in that breakage create new meanings out of the grammar of my body and memory. So don't worry, this isn't just going to be a boring poetry reading. We'll have plenty of time to talk afterward. All right, so this first poem is titled Unborn. A statistic. In 2016, 30.1 out of every 100,000 veterans killed themselves. Queer veterans are twice as likely to consider, attempt, and commit suicide. A cliche. Away from home and camp in summer, flower child, discover a genderless nude desire. There, a shirtless blonde, freshwater lake, virginal shore, the boy's ribs and spine against muscles and skin tug taut, cartography in which to lose oneself. Pink suns for nipples, yearning you to make tongued circles, never mind the burns. Other parts outlined by freshwater bathing. Other parts a mouth can take whole. He rises out of the water, but staring at the sun will make you blind. And the world holds the word faggot to your throat. And you two boys share a canopy of branches, oak, laurel, twin beds of pine needles pushed together. The moon fucks open birch bough gaps and paints a forest on the boy's skin. Look at this foliage speckled face. Tell yourself he looks like a girl back home. That's what it must be, even if you never loved her. Turn away now, child, and forget his name. Another cliche. Teen boy, teen joys riding up 95, best friend in the front seat playing odes to ache. He turns the music down, begs you your thoughts. You don't know if this is love. The hands held defiant, to be truck lynched kind of way. The unzipping best friend's pants kind of way. The lips wrapped around cocks kind of way. And forget the taste, you'll get over it. But worst of all, the imagine you two and a future, happily ever after kind of way. Tell yourself you're no faggot. Let that lie take you down this road. Another 15 years till you're honest, and he's gone. Muscle memory. Parents fight. Hush now, child. Father wants the home long gone. Vietnam, alternate reality where he never lost his daddy, nor the colonnaded home, nor the yellow flag pinioned to soil never sown, with steel like glass shattered underfoot. Rule 1 of Gook Holmes, take off your fucking shoes. As I fail to take them off. Father was never a gardener, but he plants seeds, grow unchecked in abandoned homes. My worst fear, mama in the mirror, you like you, accept the younger, prettier version whose name you can't know. They take the money. Paper doesn't mix with blood like water and oil, but shitty gardeners never weed nor feed his crop makes it through customs, these malnourished stalks plaited into a noose wrapped around ma's throat. Ma, northern word for Southern ma, Viet word for mother, mom, mama, ma, north, south, mother, father, paired, each makes my living room a free fire zone. Mama, we are small women and they are big men. I learned to fight from helicopters downs at Appak and Bien Gia. Marines starved at Khe San. The palace gates in Saigon breached, us fighting skirmishes, small arms hurled, plates broken a dustpan over dad's head, dragged up the hair by mom's hair, dragged up the stairs by mom's hair. First things first paragraph of an army operations order. There's a reason the threat comes before all else. There's a reason to lace keys into your fist, make a flak vest of your teen body. There's a reason no one counts dead civilians. And I learn who the enemy is every time. A tragedy. Best friend signs a dotted line, marks a border between you and him and an army at war. Mother won't sign the papers. You are 17 and hate your country. You are 17 and want to die for it anyway. And hold a knife to your stomach. Say you'll open the only door that lets you back inside. Mother remembers, refuses still. 15 years on, you tell her who you are. Not the child at her breast, nor the teen boy, nor the camouflage that is every man's skin, but a woman grown and like her, and mama can refuse no more. Thank you. So, I'm also not a stripper, so I'm not good at taking my clothes off. They just point a camera at me and tell me which hole. That part's easy. All right, so this is, so I want to read y'all a short story. This piece of prose is titled, On Their Lips, the Name of God. This is the memory that stays with him as his blood abandons the body and life fades. This, the one comfort that will carry him into the next life. Davran had waited beneath a mulberry tree in May of last year. He'd come to love mulberries in a small way. They'd always kept him company through the boredom of waiting. It was still cool in the mornings and evenings, the breeze shaking the branches, dropping the still tart clustered berries. So strange that trees bearing fruit must sacrifice their children to live. How an animal carries that seed away, the length of a kilometer, a province, a nation, to plant and bloom again. In this way, the child's sacrifice meant something, and he'd like that. He remembers Zafar's simple house, not more than a small compound with a low wall and one building, one shed. The gate opened, Zafar standing there in the vestibule with his daughter propped up on his hip. A dim outline of a woman behind them, a handsome woman and child. Zafar put the girl down, kissed her once on each cheek, on the forehead, and on both cheeks again. He turned to his wife, and the woman smiled. The sight of Zafar's family brought Davran thoughts of the future, of blooming. At least that's how he likes to remember it. A smiling wife, a doted-upon child, things he'd hoped to have one day but never would. Zafar took him up the mountainside where they could see the whole valley. They took a small bag, some naan, dried nuts and fruit, rice. They had work to do, checking the vantage points, watching the Americans and the government troops, drawing up maps of the improvements the Yankees had made to their little outposts. These soldiers were tired or lazy or scared, so they rarely ventured out. And the summer that followed was as quiet and peaceful as anyone could hope for. Before they began their descent down the mountain, a pair of shepherds came across their path, offered them a little food and tea. They sat in a little basin in the foothills where soil had accumulated over the years from all the sediment washed down from the snow melts. While the flock grazed or huddled together or slept, the men sat around the fire, telling tall tales, reciting couplets of poetry, and resuscitating dead memories. They ate, drank tea, watched the half-disk moon crawl across the sky, trading places with the sun. The insects in the green valley below sang their song. Torch flies lit the marshy canal beds and mountain streams. A stray dog howled, and Davran felt himself fortunate for his belly, now full and warm with gravy and meat. He remembers being thankful for Zafar, who'd always been a patient eater, methodical and careful, and Davron loved watching his mouth take some things whole, tear other things off in small bites, and seeing the thin film of grease form, his lips reflecting a little of all that moonlight. In the dark, his commander's skin seemed more like polished stone than flesh. More than that, he loved listening to Zafar speak. The man told a story about a book his father had brought back from Russia, about a giant fish and the mad fisherman who'd pursued it. "We do such insane things for love," he'd said, tracing the outlines of the mad seaman's obsession. He'd said it was love that had driven him to madness, that he'd loved hunting the enormous fish, that he'd loved the fish itself, for it was the fish that had given him life. It was the fish that had given him purpose. Davron remembers all the questions he'd had of this strange tale, questions that, when he gazed at Zafar, he knew the man already had the answers to. He had thought on that while the meal warmed his belly and the fire dried the sweat from his clothes. Love deriving from purpose comforted him. It meant he could say he loved Zafar, this man who'd given him purpose, given his life meaning. And he'd learned how far that insane love would take him, but he would stay loyal. He would slaughter a fat landlord with a knife, bomb his countrymen, and in his last living moments, watch his beloved commander flee from the field. He remains, above all things, loyal. Even with the moon, they'd climbed high enough not to want to risk broken bones on their descent. So they spent the night there, camped with the shepherds around their little fire. They only had one blanket, Zafar's, and Davron was happy to let him have it, despite the night's still chilly air. But the man told him not to be foolish. It was common practice among fighters, indeed a common practice among soldiers everywhere, to make spoons of their bodies and embrace close to share heat. He dissented, curled himself into his commander's grasp, his body like that of an infant in the womb, and listened to Zafar's strong, steady breath, took in his musk, smelling of damp soil and leather and burnt powder, and fell drowsy to the steady metronome of his heart against his ribs. They slept the whole night through, neither man moving a centimeter from each other. Through every challenge, every moment of doubt, every difficult choice, Davron remembers this night above all other nights. When the rooster woke the morning, Zafar shook Davron awake. Soon they heard the mullahs in the valley singing the call to prayer. The two stood side by side, knelt in unison, their bodies bending as one, and on their lips, the name of God. I have all these props, but I feel a little bit strange. I'm going to use them anyway, I suppose. There's really nothing more gender affirming as a trans woman than to wear a strap, in my opinion. Of course, this is like the awkward part of a hookup with a trans girl when she's trying to get the dick in the strap. You know what I mean. I promise I'm really good. This poem is titled Transgenital Mutilation. The knife is mama crying at the shoppers in Sarajevo on the nightly news, disappearing into hemic vapor, and wanting to know why daddy used mama's head to make a hole in the drywall, and why the American dream meant an empty pantry, bills left unpaid on the kitchen table, ramen for dinner with a bit of Spam again. I watched my father skimming maggots from the instant ramen onto his tongue so as not to waste protein. The knife is daddy cutting my mother tongue from my throat and shoving our rapist language between my gritted teeth, as if I could speak your filthy pig Latin with a clean accent, like it would ever camouflage my hide white as the walls of the home we couldn't afford, but he hurled mama's head into anyway. So why did my parents come to America only to freeze every winter, the heat cut off? Was it for the summers with no water to bathe? Was it for a childhood where father loomed like American bombers overhead and mama screaming when the first fist connects like the air raid sirens, raising the alarm too late? Blood on the floor, a body that might have been saved, our rooms, a cancer of hemmed off hamlets, a concentration camp by a different name. The only gifts mama left were a story. To avoid capture, the sisters bit off their tongues, hands clutched, and leapt into the Red River, drowning themselves to escape disgrace. I didn't learn anything from mother. The knife is father dragging me by my hair into that dark room. He uses the weapon that had made him a French quadroon. The act does what legionnaires have always done with captured women, rending my clit, sawing off my tits, wresting from me what I can make, and makes me a man I never wanted to be. And when he finally flees my home is 1,000 reasons to hate myself. And I thought the best way out was joining too. The army is the bayonet that blades from my chest, the best little tits the Veterans Administration is willing to supply. The most I can get, hooker clinics full of heroes of war's domestic, and a hospital for Uncle Sam's trauma horrors, humping Afghan mountains, seeding the soil with leaden, depleted uranium seeds, counting kills, hearts and minds, sweeping clear, no clear conscience as a serial killer at 23. My commander says, if there were a button that killed every Pashtu, he'd tape it down. On my knees at the bullet's crack, my white uncle promises to pay off my college debt as long as I keep my head down and my ass up, strangling the barrel of my pistol, around in the chamber, safety off. These years later in the cancer ward, I'll wish I pulled the trigger to stop the memory of non-consensual bottom surgery for a child cleft in twain, entrails painting 100 meters of sands, villages kissed by fire, their starry-eyed lovers left airstruck, bleeding from their ears like in the stories Mama told me when she begged me not to sign that dotted line. I see her in the woman screaming over her gutted child, in the lung-shot teacher's son clawing the dirt, wailing like she did the first time she wouldn't sign and I ran away from home. Don't go, please don't go, my Afghan comrades say. Saigon, 1975, I find her eyes in every face and find another reason to hate myself again. The girl telling me I should never have come here. The teenagers spitting at my feet. The children I'll never bear in my barren womb, slinging rocks at up-armored caravans. She glares up at mine, a sky infested with B-52s, pregnant with orphan makers, her hands working the fields, feeding Kalashnikovs, bearing bodies, bearing bombs, tearing out her broken heart, watching the limbless dead who don't yet know it, her shell-shocked cousin's nightmares, wake the whole family. Each time he punches the wall, a splintered shard of psychic shrapnel lodges in her body, in her bones. She knows she can't sign away her teenage daughter, knowing her signature condemns me to sin against her again in the name of my country. Three. This is long. Blood money is the rusty needle that makes the husband stitch, so I can be broken again. Blue blood smearing, red stripes staining, white sheets, screaming battle cries, one nation under God is dead, long live Adam Smith and his prophet Ronald Reagan, capital gains, cream pie and trickle down my thighs. I wish I could explain why Daddy used to vote Republican, like it would put rice in our stomachs and bleach our skin, but forgot that the party of profit learned its lessons from the Connex Corporation, shipping our boys Budweiser and bullets and Dow Chemical Catastrophe on next day prime delivery. So they'd never forget they swore to support and defend a constitution enshrining our racial caste system, 13th Amendment, 3/5 compromise, our own humanity when corporations are the only people who get their bailouts. It's so easy to sell yourself when you know your pimp will pay for college and put a roof over your head and feed you and give you all your shots. Uncle Sam tore me up and sent me home to find the American dream trafficking martyrs ads for Black lives that matter only for profit, 1,000 9mm lynchings, 1,000-fold more back in bondage, and God bless our Pinkertons, rubber bullets and barrage batons, protecting the peace if peace means property. Mama used to tell me to keep my head down, always, smile, never speak your mother tongue, for if they discover what you are, Nixon will order more strikes on Haiphong. I didn't know what she meant until this fatherland shoved her warnings down my throat. China doll, walking while trans, just a pair of legs, catcall, alarm, fearing acid in the face. She fled one war just for us to fight another and another more. And I won't be surprised if I die in the same tax bracket where she, as Mama when she came here, and work started at midnight, yellow gloves round toilet bowls, knees bruising the tile floor. To survive in the West is to remember that white supremacy isn't a burning cross on the lawn, but mother crying into her hands when the last paycheck didn't go far enough. To survive in the West is to remember that genocide isn't a gas chamber, but your teacher correcting your English when you recite the Pledge of Allegiance. To survive in the West is to remember that capitalism isn't a monocled millionaire, but the men on the screen paying you $50 to eat your own cum on camera. And to survive in the West is to outsource your labor from your soul and make a plantation of your body and a colony of your heart, and never mind the policeman for, in my head, I can't tell the difference between cops and the Taliban, my comrades and GIs. Isn't that some kind of castrating blade? You want and want and want, but the bank account's bleeding out and the helos aren't coming. No one is coming, soldier. Cowboy up, God is dead, so embrace the suck. But you have so much you want still, and plaster your facade in personals, hoping that someone answers. Single Asian tea girl looking for love. You, cute, patient, kind. See where it goes. I keep accidentally writing poems when I should ask for what I want, to fall in a simple fool's love. But loving the line, I mistake aesthetics for passion, seeking the right words, if only words translated to you, your downy nape. Lips cracked, your breath on the glass. These stupid little words bar the way. Single Asian tea girl doesn't know what she wants, but will take anything she can get. My body is a pale tropical flower. Transplant me in wet soil. Shower my thin limbs. Sing to me as you would a child. Though you'd born none, cursed and uprooted. Why can't I just ask for the one thing I need? Fuck me apart, let's pretend for one night that you'll tend to me in the morning. Single Asian tea girl, bad at relationships, good at sex. Good was never descriptive for you. I'll arch my back, dinner unmade. Every mess I've made splayed on your table. I promise nothing but the sound of hands taking for you. I am a bird's bones under a closing fist. Ask and I'll come. Take what you want, but please ask nicely. Single Asian tea girl, really up for anything. If I told you I was easy, would you read between the lines, broke to create new meaning, and how many will read a poem where all I want are teeth on my neck, my skin flogged wet, my darkest recess full of you, and I shattered at your feet. I'll give you the blade, now bury it in my flesh. Exotic Asian tea girl available for hookups in Brooklyn. Me so fucking horny, baby. If I write enough poetry, I can fool myself into living a life where I wake each day to a different dawn, a different lover, each a lighthouse, a flame, a lamp against whose side I fling my moth body. I can fool myself into tasting something wet and alive. I can fool my fragile frame, say your fire won't devour my beating wings. 5. My body is the operating room. The men are holding me down, and the women who say they fight for women but pin you down too. Your body is the parent, afraid of where their child won't fit. And I am my own mother, this time telling me she can't accept what I've become. And all my parts rise up against me, this part too big, that part too small. One small wonder if I ever get out of bed after heart fractures time, my best enemy, a rapture, a dirge, a sentence commuted too many years on bread and water will starve morale close to rout. And who dared plant me here below the rosebed to sprout and bud is to be uprooted. Strangling gardeners, hands on every billboard, prison camps of perfection, some other gays, their wardens, commercials selling beer or bikinis I can never tell. To those who can't grasp the difference between wanting to fuck something or kill it, or kill what they'll never have, I am too many years past my premeditated expiration date, yet this body is a stranger. She surprises me in the morning with gifts of filling, of lengthening, of gasping proclamation, of softening, dewy pords screaming into the pillow, where they like you back, they like you, best friends sent on the sheets we shared, wondering whether we'll be the ones who make it out of live, but I still wonder if I'll ever be as pretty as she says, no matter how many times she tells me I am. Thanks. Thank you. This last piece is a lyric essay, so a little bit more prosaic, a little bit more sensible. And this is titled "The Insurgent" is a poem. The Insurgent is a poem in the way that poetry cannot be written nor governed by the barrel of a rifle. Instead, poetry is an ambush, improvised literary device waiting in shade. The poem becomes the forest for the moment, watching for the moment your mind drifts, when the sergeant drops, lung shot, ribcage hugging tearful organs too tight, grasping for voice. Bystander trees will bear witness to sweat-slick skin, salted against steel-cored fists. The Insurgent is a poem in the way that poetry has made me cry into my hands on the subway when I read the lines printed on my palm in blood. I laced my fingers into his fingers, and for once in my life, a man needed me. The train car is the steel bird that takes him home, and the poem knows she isn't enough to make him remember your fingers between his fingers, your hands diking his flooded limbs. You didn't stop crying until the helos crossed the horizon. And even when the colonel told you to stop and be a man, because there are no girls in combat zones, your sergeant never speaks to you again. But how do you tell him what you are in a language that men understand? 2. The Insurgent is a poem, and yes, there is such a thing as bad poetry. Lines too on the nose, polemic pretending to be lyric. The first time you wore a dress, a man whispers, faggot, in your ear. poetry. Smile, baby. I love your body. My dick is a lesbian too. Poetry. Are you listening? Did you hear me? Come back here, you ugly bitch, stupid whore, filthy cunt. Somehow this too qualifies as fucking poetry. If you wove their words into an exquisite corpse, write what their eyes sing instead. I want, I yearn, I ache, I hurt, I cry. I hate myself so much, I need you to be afraid. But how do you talk the jumper off the ledge? Cut the noose, jam the gun, blunt the knife between his legs. The poem is an insurgent you will write alive because they won't let you live. The same as one man's terrorist or another man's freedom fighter. But you can't write poetry by the letter of laws, scarred across your wrists. The Insurgent can be a poem written by a poet who hates poetry. You watch 1,000 little boys in men's clothes charge up Potemkin steps in January to pull Bolshevik bullets from Romanov carcasses. The world is awash in little boys. Little boy for president. Little boy shoots his toy car into space. Little boy wins 99% of the vote again. Little boy insider trading, changing the rules when he crashes daddy's stock market again. Little boy telling you, relax, baby, just the tip. I promise to pull out. Democratic People's Republic of Little Boys, having another ICBM measuring contest. Little boy for a judge, saying he can't sit by and let another little boy's life be ruined because he made an immature mistake. Rape. They kick and scream toy soldier tantrums. Oh no. They kick and scream toy soldier tantrums. Beep, beep, beep. Make the rules. Who gets to play with who? Who gets to stick their model rocket in your toy box? So what does it matter if the glaciers melt and everyone gets sick and boys playing police rob us of breath and there are no girls allowed to take charge of their bodies? Boys will be boys will be boys and nothing else. The Insurgent is a pickup artist knocking at your door. How big is your dick? I'm a top, you know. You're so beautiful, I wanna fuck you in half. Do you like to be choked? You little slut, you'll do what I say. A chorus of girls just like you warns. Creep, creep, stay away, never showed up. Assaulted me, never paid, pinned me down. Your sisters sing, don't do it, no matter the pay. The Insurgent is a poem, and poems can lie. Like how our boys wear blue, and girls wear pink, and boys don't like other boys like that. They just fuck other girls. Tell it to your father when he slips into your bed and you drown in what happens next. Your father who smiles when he sees the towers fall because America left his country to die. But all you see is a scared teenage boy who's left his family behind, watching his home burn on the horizon. Remembers, little boys don't cry. Daddy never spoke about the war. Men don't cry, and if you talk about the pain, you're a fucking pussy like the rest of the beta cucks. So they still play with dolls like that, reach up their skirts and shove them face down in the bed and pluck off their limbs like that. The Insurgent is a poem that doesn't know what he's about, refusing every note to touch on something tender. The boys who want to buy my body turn and say, what if? What if? What if I wore women's clothes? What if I made you make me a toilet? Your dumpster, your slave. Make me, they sing, make me beautiful and pretty and soft just like you. But the thing is, they never show up and they never fucking pay. And write the same lines, boys will be boys will be boys, and nothing else will ever give them what they want so dearly, but keep themselves from being. So how do you write a poem about feelings they fear so so much? How do you give them beauty over the bodies of slain girls like you? How do you write them a poem like they want, your body on the mattress, your blood on the floor. And if you won't lie down, if you won't surrender, when they cut out your tongue, all you can tell them is no. 3, The Insurgent is a poem because powerful men rarely write poetry. Preferring prose and its grammar and its rules, its trickle-down, law and order, genocides in Bed-Stuy, food deserts, and collars around your neck so tight, when a man overdosed on your block, your neighbors watched, wondering whether to call the cops instead of an ambulance. It's the lash on our backs, sending us into submissive states so deep that your Vietnamese aunt who fled the West spits on refugees she used to be decades before, freezing on their quisling barbed wire borders. Don't tell me about Ukraine when the same savages who sacked Rome and wiped their asses with libraries throw Molotovs into our proverbial jungle and make refugees twice over again. So when you hear the words Western civilization, use them in your poem as another name for genocide. The Insurgent is a poem because she must learn to fight without the master's weapons. Drafts miss their mark, and on the trail, your clumsy hands fumble your explosive words, but despite your dead, despite the secondhand memory of 1 million starved on imperial dominance, despite 3 million more dead on democracy's dime, march on through this manuscript, fail and fail and fail again. As many times, as many lives as it takes to write something true. The Insurgent is a poem our masters keep out of our grasps. There's nothing more dangerous than a gook, a faggot, a coolie, a tranny, a fucking woman with a book. It's no wonder your students don't read poetry, because gun control began so former slaves could never arm their rage, so smuggle them lyric and form and pen. Make them cadres of dreamers, of memory, of desire. Desire's not yet won, but don't poison them with the genocidal hope that they too can have that American dream. Make your classroom a training camp, and damn the drones and their civilian-seeking missiles. Where you teach them poetry is rebellion, the way Mama taught you how to bring down an empire with nothing but yearning. In turn, your students will teach you every single day where to hide their memories among their tenement tunnel networks should they fall. They take aim by naming the policeman, the executive, the politician, the general, the profiteer. The Insurgent is a poem who dies in the millions. But scrawl their couplets, last wills to be read, so everyone cut down, 10 more will take their place. Until a flood of odes tell us who we are, we who bear the children, we who share the wheat, we who bake the bread, we who feed the village, we who build our homes from which no empire can profit, nor claim, nor raise. 4. The Insurgent is a poem you've read for 11 years. In the end, she's just words. Nothing to arm yourself against those who wish you dead. It's not the tools that make a home for the family you made, nor a magic pill that can make the pain go away. Every day of your life you've been fighting. So how do you hold your sins in your chest? The bomb maker's corpse spread across 200 meters, or the newlywed's charred shoe, the only thing his bride has to bury. The man prostrate on soil left fallow, searching his chest as if dreaming. Write the poem from the jawbone, the jawbone shard, the cock in the dirt, the burgundy stain, the skin fused to bark, the hairs miraculously and somehow unburnt, the pink mist of waters that once flowed through the heart. The Insurgent is a poem that doesn't care for your feelings. She won't stop the next man who assaults you again. Won't keep the drugs out of your veins to forget the men. The boys still hurl their shells, hoard their toys, and break their tin soldiers. The poem gives you useless things. The man you killed, his personal effects, snuff, folding scissors, a mirror, and 2 grenades. A single leg, scorched and amputated below the knee, the bloody shoe, the insurgent's wife buried, each a poem and one last turn. They planted a green and white flag over their grave. How do you make something new? How do you break the grammar of all this detritus, all this trash? 11 years on, and you still can't get the lines out of your head. Once you stood in a graveyard as Amriki boots trampled the stones and wondered how many generations rested in this subterranean city, wondered who replaces the colors when the field of jade and alabaster and sable and scarlet banners fade as one war passes into the next. From the field of ghosts, you'll steal this line. Tell spring not to come this year, because the grass of your country grows not green, but red with blood. Great reviser, peace be upon him, write me a shield to stay this pain. Write me your sword to feed to your forge. Make this fury into the tools I lack. Let the bombs unburst and return to their planes. Let the shells get back into their cannons. Let the bullets go back to their barrels. Let the flame return to breath, and let me resurrect the dead. Let me sing their stories. So listen, finally listen. When you tell it on the mountain, make sure you say their names. 5. The Insurgent is a poem to your defeats. When you find her wet on your cheeks, tell your lover you're sick about writing about war. She'll reach inside your surrender and suture the amputated pasts to her perfumed room, teeth for needles, clothes on the floor, her lips for thread. The morning's exit wounds bleed through her gauzy curtains. The Insurgent is a poem who hides inside your bones, reminding you that your trauma is a traveler lost in time, confusing pain for pain. Bodies like mothers fall from a jet fleeing Bagram to meet the tarmac. And A fucks you, but he does not love you, refusing to bandage your injuries when the war comes back. And the helicopters flee Saigon only to hurl themselves off the North Tower to escape the flames. You put the needle in V's arm, knowing that tomorrow she'll hate you while bullets fly, and every man looking down your shirt is your father slipping into your bed once your brother's asleep. You can't think about the man you killed without feeling your father's hands on your hips. And your lover cries on the bed because no matter how loud she screamed, you still couldn't hear her. So the Insurgent is a poem who hides that love away. When love is an act of terror, and Christ is on a watch list, and your fridge is always empty, and your bills have gone unpaid, and another student's brother was just shot down in the street, and everything seems hopeless, and you take your ass to market but come up empty-handed and feel just like a child, because no matter how loud you sing it, no one hears the fucking poem. You tell your lover you're sick of writing about revolutions that'll never come. Your snot in the nose, tears on the sheets, face in your palms, screaming for the war in your head to end, but the poem is an insurgent who digs up all that love and shepherds you into her cavern. Through the arteries and veins, her body gives you shelter in her perfumed breath, among your clothes cast aside, in the sun breaking through the dark ringlets of her hair, only enough to keep you drawing breath. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think that we're supposed to do something else now, but I don't know what.
Coming to help. Now there will be the moment of question and answer with Drew and Jay. But since we need to reorganize a bit the stage, we take a 2 minutes break, but please don't go away. I think we will take this moment really to reflect on your words, and I really want to thank you deeply for this wonderful performance and the really important text that you wrote through. And we also discuss about this, and we will make it public at the Disruption Network Club website after the conference, so if people want to read it again, you can. So I would say now let's just wait 2 minutes that we reorganize the stage, and Drew, thank you again. Then we will have the moment of discussion, and you will be on stage. And I also want to remind the people that are following us online that during the question and answer it will be possible to ask also questions through the streaming and the chat that we have. So keep in mind this, and also Jay, you will moderate. You can then ask our team over there if there is something from the virtual world. Thank you, and please don't leave your seats because we just do 2 minutes break.
Hello? Okay, everyone can hear me. Great. Appreciate it. Well, thank you so much, Drew. I'll just let you finish getting dressed. No,
That's all right.
I'll continue. No, really, thank you so much for this performance, and for, as you say, telling us the same story 4 times, but I think in 4 really fascinating and interesting and intricate ways. So I might even use that framing, I think, for our Q&A. It seemed to me that you kind of almost had these sort of ideas around race and war and gender and sex. There's much else besides, but these felt like the big themes or the big parts of the piece. And so I kind of really want to kind of like talk about all of those and how they intersect, and how they kind of like work and bounce off each other to kind of create this kind of like final performance. When we were talking a few weeks ago, when we kind of had our first sort of discussion and conversation, you said something that has really stuck with me. You said, in fact, I'm going to say it, sort of quote you properly, you said, "Conflict and transition made reality clear." And it's really stuck with me because it says so much about the experiences that you're kind of bringing to the stage, the experiences that you're talking about in your poetry. Could you talk a little bit about the kind of the conflict side of that? Could you talk a little bit about how the conflict side of that and the transition side of that has made reality clear and what that kind of meant?
Right. So first, I think that having to participate in a very immoral war, but and knowing, well, how do I phrase this? When I was in college, when I was in university, I needed the army to pay for it because I really couldn't afford it. And when I went to university, I became quite radicalized, having seen what was going on just on the news and creating kind of like fostering my own community and family. And so I went to war like as someone who is already like politically conscious, but having to perform not just my duties, but perform these like forms of masculinity that I recognized, that I grew up with, but became incredibly more amplified through what amounts to a death cult. I mean, I think that it gives truth to the lie. Going over and hearing the same language being used about the war that you are fighting that had been used for your parents' war, and repackaged as if it was a new thing, right? Like counterinsurgency isn't new, it's just every single time it just gets repackaged over and over, and then having to live with the human consequences of it. And that's one big thing that's very noticeable in American society, is despite all of this reverence for the soldiers, despite all this like militaristic rhetoric, it's still quite separated from those human consequences. So few Americans have any real blood on their hands or recognize the blood that's on their hands. And then transition just highlighted all of those same problems that became amplified, or at least those amplified problems that I saw in the military, but out in the rest of the world, because it functionally makes no difference what gender I am or choose to be or like aspire to be or have to suppress. But when you live in I just said it, live in a society. But we do live in a society where those orders are really important. These structures around gender and sexuality are important in order to maintain a certain form of power. Me killing some guerrilla in Afghanistan, or killing a newlywed, or facilitating like things that I'm deeply ashamed of, like it's like what, there's a general in American history, General Smedley Butler, who said, war is a racket, right? And that he was basically a gangster for capitalism. And recognizing that in front of us, a simple example, as soldiers, we would get paid. I was happy to get like $42,000 a year as a commissioned officer. But the people and my soldiers were getting much, much less. So like 22,000 or 30,000. And these civilian contractors would be making six figures. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then the people above them, and then the people above them were making, hundreds of thousands, then millions, then trillions of dollars. Our own legislators, our own senators were among the biggest profiteers from the 20-year war in Afghanistan. And And then, yeah, like coming home and thinking like, oh yeah, America's a really free place, I should be okay, right? But to be a target of so much moral panic simply for existing, simply for being a human being with desires and asking for something simple, like, I am a woman, or asking for something simple like, I don't know, don't kill me, it just shows how narrative informs so much violence, how narrative can push us forward. And so this is why in The Insurgent as a poem, I needed to include those parts. Because just because, you know, stories can be beautiful and liberatory, just because we can learn and grow from narrative or poetry doesn't mean it's always good. It's narratives that bring us to choose violence. It's a really twisted narrative that so many people have in their minds about who transgender people are that lead them to murder us by the dozens, and we're not even really counting, at least in America. So many of the deaths of transgender women are not counted as hate crimes. They're just homicides, right? So in that regard, it's like our own humanity is becoming less and less and less. And they are, in America, like many states that I served in have introduced anti-trans bills. Legislating us out of existence is kind of something that I really wish I didn't have to say like every other sentence, but.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, you've said so much already. I sort of, there's so many kind of layers to this. And I kind of wanted to pick up on what you just said there about the insurgency poem. And what you've also just said about doing something for your own survival, right? That actually fills you with shame, right? You were in the military, you did things that you probably didn't really want to do, but you did it because you kind of had to and because you needed to live, right? I wonder about the kind of how you kind of square that circle, because do you think of yourself as an insurgent or as an invader? Do you think of yourself, when you look back on that time, you know, as a politicized person, do you think of yourself as the conqueror or as the person going in, or do you think of yourself as something else?
I think that the answer to that, I think, is really complex, and maybe there isn't really a full answer, and maybe that answer ends up changing depending on how I feel at a given moment. I wouldn't necessarily see myself as I learned that they don't say egg for someone who is probably going to transition but doesn't know they're trans yet. We call them eggs in America because eventually they crack and a bird comes out, aka a beautiful trans person. But it was kind of like being an insurgent egg in a lot of ways. I didn't really realize that this would lay the foundation for the rest of my life, that process of radicalization. And yeah, I mean, I think we all have to begin to become insurgents, right? Just by existing, trans people are insurgents. Here in Germany, I've learned that injectable hormones are not legal, and but so many people do it anyway. I forgot my shot, and someone was able to help me out yesterday, and I'm so happy about that community that I was able to find. But even that little structural thing, right? The structural inequity when it comes to trying to get healthcare, the structural inequity that sends so many of us into sex work, the structural inequities that force us into this deep place of need, of fear, not just of structural violence, but also like the direct violence that we face, and also the cultural violence. Anything from Silence of the Lambs to this kind of all the trans panic defenses that somehow are still quite prevalent. Again, at least in America, I have a very American context here. So I think that like I think that it's really hard to say one way or another. I think that it's important, and what I sought to do with the poem is to create an intentional slippage through everything, right? The slippage of, right, cisgendered masculine person, man, cisgendered man that's heterosexual, like they too can be insurgents. We know this too well. These little boys, insurgents to this like larger order of polite society, or my students, my teenagers and young adults at university or at high school. James Baldwin said that he had always been struck in America by the depth of emotional poverty and how the lengths to which that emotional poverty informed how cut off Americans, and he really was meaning white Americans, were from their fellow person, from their own self. And in so many ways, like, yeah, the writer at the Capitol, the US Capitol building is very much in this place of need. We sometimes are all insurgents because the world we've built around us with the structures that are all in place, be it we all agree that this piece of paper equals money, that this card like has an indication of numbers on it, that has a worth, like we all agree on this thing and it strangles us. We all agree that boys wear blue and girls wear pink and it strangles us. We all agree that terrorism is a bad thing and we get into a war for 20 years and it strangles us. So in that, my hope is that we all find or all are able to see that insurgent necessity. But in terms of insurgents, we also have to remember that victory is not on the horizon, that we will fail and fail and fail. We're gonna lose friends. We're gonna get hurt. But enduring defeat, I think, is one of the biggest or most important tools an insurgent has. That we all have to endure some form of defeat, and it's a lot like revision as a poet. I was banging my head against the wall over this manuscript, which is why I was a little rough, just days before coming here. And I think I was on my like 12th draft before it finally clicked, and it really required, you know, all of these lines being cut, all these losses, all these defeats, all this pain. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us to learn, but especially if we do want to change the state of things.
I noticed that in your performance, that there were moments that were unintended, or maybe that were like more mimetic than you perhaps meant them to be. So when you were putting on the dildo, for example, I was like, yeah, I've been there. You know, I was like, oh, this is just as long and awkward as it is in real life.
I know.
And I love the way that you kind of kept kind of breaking the kind of silence to kind of put us at ease in some ways. And then also when you knocked over the water, I thought it was such a lovely effect on the stage. It was very beautiful, actually. So there's something in there, I think, about vulnerability, right? Because I think your work as a sex worker, as a porn performer, you must also have these kind of insights into that poverty that you talk about, but also ways of moving beyond that poverty.
Right. You know, for a long time, I tried to kind of put on this like sexy sex worker persona for performance, but it doesn't fit. It never really fit. Just like the uniform that I was wearing a few minutes ago just never felt like it fit. Like masculinity never fit. So it does feel more important to me to try and be genuine. And the porn that I've made that I'm most proud of isn't where, you know, the biggest thing has been inside me, or the most things happen, or whatever, however you want to quantify or qualify like a good pornography. But instead, it's something that captures something really genuine. I did a scene for this company, Aorta, who I really love. They're so wonderful. And it was one of, not the first, but one of the first shoots that kind of centers heavily on trans feminine bodies. And it was me and this other trans girl. And, you know, we were racking our brains over how to do this thing that we wanted, because we were kind of trying to center the shoot around some kind of theme. And we decided that we would kind of wrestle around, but in what context, what narrative frame, until finally we were like, well, we got into the scene, we really want to fuck each other, so why don't we just do two trans girls waking up next to each other in bed? Why don't we show, because I don't know, it's so much of the porn I've either like watched or done is focused on certain aspects of being trans with girl dicks. It's, you know, so many girls like take Viagra to, so many other performers take Viagra so they have hard penises so that they can like have PIV or PIA sex. And well, but they don't ever do that in their normal lives. Some girls do, and that's great, but a lot of us don't. Mine does not work that way, for example. So instead, it was much more affirming to be like, hey, this is what it looks like when we have sex. This is what it really looks like when we really have sex, not like this performativity, which, you know, I sometimes don't know like who it's for. Yeah.
Yeah, I really get that. And it sort of reminds me a little bit of what was kind of being spoken about in the previous talk, about the kind of performativity of gender and so on. I wanted to kind of track back a little bit though, if that's okay, just to talk about some of the kind of legacies of war, and also of being a veteran. I'm really fascinated by this because it's not very often that I get to talk to somebody with this kind of like background and experience who's also got these kinds of politics, right? And I kind of really wondered because you mentioned it earlier as well, you mentioned kind of like the insurgency at the Capitol and so on. And I kind of really wondered what you thought of that moment, like what was kind of going through your mind and your head when you saw that kind of like moment, historical moment, I would say.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, Karen. Yeah.
Okay. When Kabul fell, I had been out of the army for 10 years.
Yep.
And I thought it was all behind me. Actually, Tatiana had to remind me to put in my bio that I was a veteran. That is how far behind me all of this has felt.
Right, okay.
But, you know, it hurts, and that's not an adequate description. Instead, I'll tell you how it hurts. It hurts because, you know, my dad was from the South, and he was part of this more privileged side of colonialism. His father, my grandfather, we never met, allegedly is half French, though no one, you know, there's a lot of silence around that. And my great-grandmother on my mother's side is also half French, but they're treated very radically different ways. My great-grandmother was a pariah, and the only person she could marry was my great-grandfather, who was also kind of a pariah for having served in the French colonial military in Vietnam. Whereas my grandfather on my father's side is this more privileged, was sent to Paris to learn surgery so he could be an army doctor in the colonial army again. And so knowing that, or not knowing that, but like, you know, I saw those kinds of class divides, those kinds of oppositional political divides in my own house. The way that my dad would talk about my mom, like she was like a backward country girl. And he was like sophisticated, and he liked fine things, and wanted this big house. That's there. And you watch Kabul fall, and that stacks on top of seeing your Afghan friends getting murdered in their fields, and watching like some rich Afghan governor in his walled-off compound sipping tea at the same time. And that stacks on top of, you know, watching my mom cry all those times, hearing the police come every single month when the bills were due because my parents would fight again, and that stacks on standing. It's okay. And I mean, like, it's impossible. This is the thing about trauma, especially complex traumas like this, is, right, I can't tell the difference between a Taliban trying to shoot at me mnemonically and emotionally and psychologically in many ways from my friend who I trusted pushing me into a dark corner in a club and reaching up my skirt. And that's, I think, so many of us, like, we don't have a full understanding of trauma, and it just leaves us with all these fragments, all these useless things. And so what do we do with them then? And I think, you know, poetry is lovely because it's never going to give me an answer. Stories are lovely. Maybe they will never give me an answer, but in these details, in these fragments, the audience, the reader, another writer might be able to find themselves in those details because we find each other in those lived details. And I think that's the best one can do with something like that.
I really appreciate that. I'm going to open it up to the audience, both physically and online. I'm not sure if there's anybody with an immediate question, or anybody online who's already asked something. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So from my personal side, I want to thank you, Drew, because that's been insightful and beautiful. So this is just from my comment. And from the online audience, we have two questions. Maybe I can give you the first one. So do you help other people to elaborate their experiences through poetry? And if yes, which kind of feedback do you have?
Would you say that one more time?
Do you help other people to elaborate through poetry their experiences? And if yes, which kind of feedback do you have?
Yeah. So I think there's something I do. I have to as an educator. I teach in the university in addition to everything else. And when I ask someone to revise their work, right, I do point to details, because we do, again, find each other in lived details, but also I talk to them more about memory than I do about metaphors or symbols or the beauty of an image. Instead, like, I think you can find those things on your own. They exist in your lives. It's something as simple as, right, a gauzy curtain and the light coming through it. It's as simple as how something felt on your skin, how something sounded to your ear, how something tasted on your tongue. That's where you can find that beauty. But I talk about memory because so much of literature, be it prose or poetry, relies heavily on association. It relies heavily on the way that the mind works. What I have noticed recently is that there is this bigger trend, not just in established authors or poets, but across the board, with more indie poets like myself, of writing in more fragmentary ways, because that is more, maybe not mimetic, but more embodied in how we are able to understand everything in our world. We can't, there's no one answer. We want simple answers. We want simple answers to why there's genocide. We want simple answers as to why COVID-19 killed 1 million people in America. We want simple answers, but they don't exist. The world is, in fact, like more a complex network of, a complex system of interdependent parts. Returning to the subject of violence, for example, a student of mine wanted to write something about police brutality in his neighborhood. So I asked him, and he's very intelligent, of course. He could cite statistics. He could talk about the ways in which the oppression occurred, but instead, I asked him to turn to Freire and politicize that which is personal, but more importantly, personalize that which is political. How do we experience, how do we live, how do we feel and capture inside of our memories and our hearts those violences, or those moments of liberation for that matter. The process of writing, I feel, in terms of feedback, it has to be about how the heart works. It has to be about how the mind works. It can't be a camera. We aren't cameras, right? One can't simply take a picture of a moment or a scene or film a scene and have that suffice. Instead, it does have to be inflected. It has to come alive. And for it to do that, like, the first step is really like asking and interrogating memory.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, what you're saying kind of, I think, does link back a little bit to what you kind of ended with this idea of trauma, right? Because trauma often results in a sort of plaiting together of disparate things, and it's the kind of unplaiting that can be quite healing, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're really, the other interesting thing we should remember about trauma is it's not having a PTSD flashback isn't a bad thing necessarily. We're really wonderful, complex biological machines, and trauma is a way of teaching us. But being that we're not, out in the forest running away from big cats, the way that it teaches us, I think, has to change. And I don't have like an answer, nor am I a clinician, so I can't really say anything to that. But I think, at least for me, with the gift of mind that is able to capture abstraction, I can choose to like use what lessons trauma has to give me and turn it into something different from another angle. Returning to this theme of insurgency, the army calls what insurgents do, quote unquote, asymmetric warfare. Symmetric warfare occurs between two kind of equal forces who have an equal understanding of how you do a war. But asymmetrical wars happen when one side has a very different understanding, different materials, different tactics, whatever. And so I think we have to approach all of the things that we've talked about so far as these asymmetrical warfare tools, but we're not picking up rifles. We're using better, softer weapons instead.
Were there any questions from the audience? Yeah, right at the back there.
Yes.
Wait for the microphone, because it's just going to amplify you.
Hi. So quite a lot of your examples of insurgency were kind of about self-creation against a sort of hostile environment that's not intended for you to exist and be there at all in the military and elsewhere. And then you were just talking just now about weapons and finding softer weapons. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about the place of sabotage in an insurgency.
Right. So all the trans people in this room are currently sabotaging gender actively. I think right. Do you mean direct action, or do you mean other ways? I mean, sabotage, here, I can answer that question. Yeah, how do you do violence to the food stamps office when the violence that's being done, can't be felt until after the paperwork's come back rejected? How do you do violence to the hospital that makes it harder for you as an individual to get PrEP, HIV prophylactic, but won't even check your heart health to give you dick pills? How do you do violence, in my case, in New York City, to like the 13th largest army in the world, the NYPD? I don't know. I think that's a hard question. I don't know right off the bat, but instead, maybe we should look at this question of parallel structures as sabotage. So perhaps we should make our own fucking hospitals. Maybe we should do away with the fucking police. But, what do you do if someone steals? We have to kind of learn that painfully, don't we? What do you do when someone steals? I don't know, maybe feed them. Maybe talk to them. What do you do with this, what do you do with the lack of access? Well, I don't know, maybe we should actually start building these communities and networks. At the heart of Vietnamese society is the family, of course. But the basic building block of Vietnamese society is the village. And at the site of the village, that's where you live, that's where you work, and you work beside your neighbors to bring in the rice every season, every harvest season, and every planting season, to put it in anew. And then when your ancestors or when anyone dies, You put them in the graveyard, and the graveyard isn't so far from the rice, and you say that your ancestors are feeding you because their bodies decompose into the earth that makes the growth of the rice that feeds you every single day possible, right? You handle, whatever injustice occurs, that is something that you handle among yourselves with the people that you live with, that you work with. And so there's a question. If you're all working to feed one another, like, what crimes would they do? And I mean, like, of course, it's complicated. It's not that simple, but I think about the Vietnamese village whenever I think about insurgency. I don't think about, some scary man in a turban with a Kalashnikov up in the mountains. I think about where he lives. The man I killed, I know so much about him. I know his role in the insurgent kind of oppositional forces. He was Hizbi Islami, not Taliban, or Hizbi Islami Gulbuddin. There's another political Hizbi Islami that's not criminalized. I know what he carried. I know how many members were a part of the team that had ambushed us that day. I know what village he is from. I know the whole organizational structure of that cell that he led, but I don't know what his favorite food was. I don't know what his favorite subject at school was. I don't know what his favorite color was. I don't know what his biggest fear was. I don't know who misses him. But all the things I do know, those aren't as important. If America wanted to win the insurgency in Afghanistan, we wouldn't have sent soldiers, we would have sent Peace Corps members, we would have learned the language, we would have married into the community. But we don't want those things, right? That's not profitable or anything like that. So instead, we should be asking, who are you? Like, what do you want? What do you yearn for? What are you afraid of? What do you love? How do you love? I think those are, it sounds like froofy or whatever, but just having conversations. People make their whole lives of de-radicalizing Nazis by having that conversation. So I hope that is some kind of answer.
Do we have any further questions from the audience? Were there any online? Oh, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
So, do you have any author that has particularly inspired you among the US or Vietnam, or any literature and poetry? Or you just found your own way of expression for your prose collection?
Yeah, it's, I don't think of, so the latter question, do I find my own way? I mean, I have my own voice and I have my own experiences, but the answer to the latter part of that question is no. Reading and writing, be it in fiction, creative nonfiction, poetry, whatever genre of emotional, artistic, written expression that you choose, is always going to be a social act. So in terms of authors, I think of a range. Bao Ninh, who wrote The Sorrows of War, one of the most influential novels I've ever read, because it was one of the few novels that was written from the perspective of a Vietnamese soldier, North Vietnamese soldier in the American War. And the way that he wrote that narrative, the way that he was able to show that fragmentation. And then the poet Olivia Gatwood or the poet Guanze. Like for Olivia Gatwood, she was like finding that voice, being able to just write. She says she writes poems about girlhood. And yeah, I mean, thinking about that, that's freeing to have such a narrow scope. There are many others. Yusuf Komanyaka, another poet. I don't know. I think maybe the biggest answer I could give for that question on influence is it goes back to what I said about villages. Let's see. Peter Sloterdijk was quoting the poet John Paul when John Paul said that books are just thick letters to friends. And you know, in today's world, we don't have these little villages sickling rice come harvest season. Instead, we do have to like write these thick letters to our friends.
Is it important to you to maintain a kind of indie practice as you described it earlier, or is it important for you to kind of move forward into bigger presses and sort of stuff like that? Like, where do you kind of sit on that stuff?
Well, I mean, I think being quote-unquote indie is more of a question of like access than anything else. I have colleagues and former classmates who have published books, but I don't know, like I never read them because because they're books just like that are on the shelf everywhere. There's so many domestic, like realism, fiction books, so many kind of almost to the point of being abject naturalism in a lot of maybe not so radical poetry. I don't know how to exist from within the margins because I've never been allowed to be in the margins. No matter in the poem, like no matter how clean my English is, I'm never going to be white. No matter how well behaved I am as a trans woman, like I'm never going to be a quote unquote real woman, or at least not in the way that like society wants me to be, right? So I don't know if there's even necessarily a choice. I would love to publish a book, but even then, like publishing a book with a big publishing house or whatever, they want a lot of changes and they want to be able to sell it. And I think as time has gone on, I'm more and more disillusioned by that part of literary life in America. So
we have a chance, I think, for one last very short and succinct question, if anybody's got one.
I'll give a short answer, I swear.
Yeah, we really... Any last questions?
I'm so glad that you're all still here and not disappeared.
No, okay. Well, in that case, Drew, like, thank you so much. Like, I could really, I mean, we could just probably do this for another hour. I have so many more questions. You can see my little bit of paper is kind of covered in scribbles. But no, I just want to thank you firstly for your performance, and secondly for just for being so open and for sharing so much. So a big round of applause, please, for Drew Pham.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much also from my side. And thank you. We will have a 15 minutes break, and then we will go on with the performance from Bridge Markland. And I hope you will come back, because it's going to be really fun. I saw Bridge performing in the past. He's really a great performer from Berlin. King in the Drag, Dragging a King is the title. So see you soon in 15 minutes. And just let's have a bit of fresh air, but come back here. Bye.